Why you wouldn't last a day in Stone Age times. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You open them, and everything you know is gone. No walls surround you, no roof shelters you from the wind. The hum of electricity, the glow of screens, the warmth of central heating, all of it has vanished into thin air. Instead, you stand in a world draped in twilight, beneath a sky so vast and unmarked by human touch that it feels like it might swallow you whole. The air bites at your skin with a cold that penetrates to the bone. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a sound, low and guttural, something massive moving through the forest. Your heart begins to race. This is not your world anymore. This is the Stone Age. You, with your soft hands and your modern sensibilities, have been dropped into the Paleolithic, a period spanning from roughly 2.6 million years ago until about 11,700 years ago. It is a time when ice sheets stretched across continents like frozen oceans, when the planet itself seemed locked in an embrace with winter that lasted for millennia. This was an era when survival was not a given, but a daily negotiation with forces far beyond human control. The Stone Age was the crucible in which our species was forged, and it was brutal beyond measure. Let me be clear about something from the start. The people who lived during this time were not primitive in the way we often imagine. They were intelligent, resourceful, and possessed knowledge that took generations to accumulate. They understood their environment with an intimacy we can scarcely comprehend today. They could read the seasons in the flight of birds, track animals across miles of terrain by the faintest disturbance in the earth, and craft tools from stone with a precision that would take you years to master, if you could master it at all. They were survivors in the truest sense, shaped by thousands of years of adaptation to a world that offered no mercy. But you are not them. You have been raised in climate-controlled comfort, with access to medicine, food that arrives already prepared, and shelter that requires nothing more from you than the payment of rent or mortgage. You have never had to make fire with your bare hands, never tracked a wounded animal through frozen wilderness, never felt the gnawing terror of true hunger that lasts not hours, but weeks. The average person reading this would not survive a single day in the Paleolithic world, not because you lack intelligence or courage, but because you lack the accumulated knowledge, the physical conditioning, and most importantly, the immunity to diseases that your body has never encountered. Consider the statistics for a moment. Research examining modern hunter-gatherer populations, which serve as our best proxy for understanding Paleolithic life, suggests that roughly 30 to 40% of children died before reaching the age of 15, with most of those deaths occurring before age 5. Among adults, life expectancy hovered between 21 and 37 years on average, though this number is skewed dramatically by high infant mortality. If you survive childhood, you might live into your 40s or even beyond, but the journey would leave its marks. Your bones would show the wear of constant physical labor. Your teeth would be ground down and infected, and your body would bear the scars of injuries that never quite healed properly. The causes of death were varied and ever-present. Studies estimate that approximately 70% of deaths among hunter-gatherers came from diseases, 20% from violence or accidents, and 10% from what we might call degenerative conditions. But these categories blur and overlap. An injury sustained while hunting might become infected, turning a survivable wound into a death sentence. A harsh winter might bring both starvation and increased susceptibility to disease. Violence between competing groups over dwindling resources could erupt without warning, and there was no police force to intervene, no hospital to patch you up afterward. What follows is not a romantic vision of simpler times or a critique of our ancestors. It is instead an honest examination of what your life would actually be like if you were transported back to the Stone Age with nothing but the knowledge in your head and the body you currently possess. We will walk through a day, perhaps the only day you would have in that ancient world. We will feel the cold that seeps into your marrow, encounter the predators that saw humans as just another source of meat, struggle with the impossible task of securing food without modern tools or knowledge, face the diseases that lurked in every cut and scratch, and confront the sheer physical demands of simply staying alive. By the end, you will understand why the Stone Age, for all its place in our evolutionary history, is a place best appreciated from the safety of the present. You will understand that survival in that era was not about being tough or resourceful in the way we use those words today. It was about having skills passed down through generations, about being part of a functioning social group, and about possessing a body and immune system adapted to challenges that yours simply is not equipped to handle. So, take a breath. Feel the warmth of your environment, whatever it may be. Be grateful for the walls around you, for the ease with which you access this information, for the medical care that awaits you if you need it. Then, let us step together into the frozen past and see exactly how long you would last. The climate that wanted you dead. The first thing you would notice, before the predators, before the hunger, before anything else, would be the cold. Not the kind of cold you experience when you forget your jacket on an autumn evening, not the chill that makes you turn up the thermostat. This is cold that has weight and presence, cold that moves through fabric and flesh as if they do not exist, cold that makes your bones ache and your thoughts slow to a crawl. During much of the Paleolithic, particularly during the last glacial maximum that peaked between 24,000 and 21,000 years ago, average global temperatures were approximately 11 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than today. That may not sound dramatic until you understand what it means in practical terms. Ice sheets stretched across most of North America and Northern Europe. Glaciers several hundred meters thick, covering landscapes where cities now stand. The world was drier, colder, and far more hostile to human life. Britain, for instance, was inhabitable for only about a quarter of the time during the period between 450,000 and 12,000 years ago. When temperatures dropped, humans simply had to leave or die. There was no middle ground. You stand in this world without preparation. The clothes you wear, whether jeans and a sweater or whatever you have on right now, are utterly inadequate. Modern clothing is designed for modern environments, buildings with heating, cars with climate control, short walks between warm spaces. Your shoes, crafted from synthetic materials or soft leather, offer no protection against terrain covered in ice and stone. Your feet, used to cushion soles and smooth floors, would be torn and bleeding within hours of walking across the frozen earth. The Stone Age people solved this problem through knowledge accumulated over thousands of years. They knew which animal skins provided the best insulation: reindeer hide for waterproof outer layers, Arctic fox fur for warmth, bird skins with the feathers still attached for lightweight insulation close to the body. They created fitted, layered clothing that functioned much like modern mountaineering gear, with each layer serving a specific purpose. They made thread from plant fibers and animal sinew, dyeing it with natural pigments, creating garments that were both functional and marked with cultural significance. But knowing that such clothing exists and being able to make it are entirely different things. To create even a simple garment, you would need to hunt and kill an animal, a task we will address shortly, then carefully remove its hide without damaging it. You would need to scrape away every bit of flesh and fat, a process that takes hours and requires specific stone tools you do not know how to make. Then comes the tanning process, using animal brains or other natural materials to treat the hide so it remains supple rather than becoming stiff as cardboard. This alone could take several days. Then you need to cut the pieces and sew them together with bone needles, again tools you must craft yourself, using thread you have made by hand. Without this clothing, you would not last through a single night. Hypothermia would set in within hours once darkness fell and temperatures plummeted. Your body, designed to maintain a core temperature around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, would begin to shut down as that number dropped. First would come the shivering, violent, and uncontrollable, then confusion and drowsiness as your brain struggled to function. Your movements would become clumsy, your speech slurred. Eventually, you would simply lie down and feel an overwhelming urge to sleep, a sleep from which you would never wake. But perhaps you survived the cold through sheer stubbornness, huddling against a rock face or finding temporary shelter in a cave. Then you face the next challenge: fire. In our modern world, fire comes from a flick of a switch on a stove, a click of a lighter, a match struck against a box. We have divorced ourselves so completely from the actual process of creating fire that most people have never done it without modern tools. In the Stone Age, fire was life. It provided warmth, protection from predators whose eyes reflected in the darkness just beyond the circle of light, a means to cook food and make it safer to eat, and a social center around which communities gathered. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans controlled fire as early as 300,000 to 1.5 million years ago, though it only became common during the Middle Paleolithic. Stone Age people created fire through friction, rubbing two pieces of wood together with precisely the right pressure and speed until the wood became hot enough to smolder. They might use a bow drill, a wooden shaft spun rapidly by pulling a bow back and forth, the friction creating an ember and a notch cut into a fireboard. Or they might strike iron pyrite against flint, producing sparks that could ignite dry grass or fungi prepared as tinder. Could you do this? Without instruction, without practice, with hands unused to such work. The process requires not just the right motion, but the right materials. You need to identify which woods work best, which have the correct density and resin content. You need tinder dry enough to catch from an ember, graduated kindling to nurse that tiny flame into something substantial, and larger fuel to maintain it. You need to do all of this with hands that are likely already numb from cold, while darkness closes in and the temperature continues to drop. Let us say generously that you managed to create fire. Now you must maintain it. Fire in the Stone Age was not something you allowed to go out casually. Starting it again required tremendous effort. Some groups kept fires burning continuously for years, carefully banking the coals at night and feeding them in the morning. You would need a constant supply of fuel, which means gathering wood, often in deep snow, carrying it back to your shelter, keeping it dry. This alone would consume hours of your day, every day, assuming you lived long enough for there to be multiple days. The climate was not simply cold, it was also dramatically unstable. Research into the period shows that temperatures could swing wildly within a human lifetime. A glacial period might be followed by a brief warming, then plunge back into frozen conditions. Such fluctuations meant that the environment was constantly changing. Animals migrated, plant food became scarce, and the strategies that worked for one generation might not work for the next. Stone Age people adapted by remaining mobile, moving to follow game and seek better conditions. But this mobility required group coordination, knowledge of the land over vast territories, and the physical stamina to travel dozens of miles while carrying all your possessions. You have none of this. You are alone, or perhaps with other equally unprepared modern people, dropped into a landscape that shifts between barely survivable and utterly lethal. Even if you understand intellectually that you need warm clothing and fire, translating that knowledge into reality with Stone Age tools and materials is an entirely different matter. The cold would not kill you quickly with drama and spectacle. It would simply drain your energy day by day, making every task harder, slowing your movements, clouding your judgment, until eventually you made a mistake from which there was no recovery. The Stone Age climate was not merely an inconvenience or a challenge to be overcome with modern determination. It was an active force working against your survival every moment of every day, and that was just the beginning. Beyond the cold waited threats even more immediate, even more visceral. Threats with teeth and claws and an appetite that included you. When you were prey. In our modern world, humans sit comfortably atop the food chain. The predators we fear exist mostly in controlled environments, zoos, and wildlife preserves, or in remote wilderness areas we can easily avoid. We have lost the visceral understanding that, for most of human history, we were not the undisputed masters of our environment. We were meat, vulnerable, relatively slow meat that many creatures found quite appetizing. The Stone Age world teemed with predators that make modern carnivores seem almost tame by comparison. These were not the endangered, conservation-dependent animals of today, clinging to shrinking habitats and learning to avoid humans. These were apex predators in their prime, massive animals that had evolved over millions of years to hunt, kill, and consume other large creatures. And you, stepping into their world, would trigger every hunting instinct they possessed. Consider the cave lion, known scientifically as Panthera spelaea. These creatures were not the lions you might see on a nature documentary. They were substantially larger than modern African lions, with males potentially reaching 1,000 pounds or more. They had powerful jaws, retractable claws that could disembowel with a single swipe, and the muscular build of animals designed for explosive power. Studies of their remains show they were formidable predators, likely hunting in the same ambush style as modern big cats, but with prey that included mammoths and other megafauna. Cave lions did not fear humans. There is no evidence that they had learned to avoid our ancestors. Instead, they likely viewed early humans as opportunistic prey, particularly the young, the old, or anyone caught alone. You, with your modern body unused to constant vigilance, would be ideal prey. You do not move with the wariness of someone who has spent their life in predator country. You do not automatically scan the underbrush for movement. Do not register the alarm calls of birds that signal danger. Do not smell the musky odor of a carnivore on the wind. By the time you noticed a cave lion, assuming you noticed it at all, it would likely be far too late. But cave lions were just one threat among many. The saber-toothed cats, including the famous Smilodon, stalked the Americas and parts of Eurasia. These animals had evolved a hunting strategy built around those massive canine teeth, which could reach nearly a foot in length from root to tip. They were not designed for a quick killing bite to the neck like modern cats. Instead, they likely used their powerful forelimbs to pin prey, then deliver devastating bites to the throat or soft areas, causing massive hemorrhaging. Humans lived alongside these creatures for thousands of years. We competed with them for prey, and in all likelihood, they occasionally preyed on us. In Europe, the cave bear, a species that could grow even larger than modern Kodiak bears, inhabited the same caves that humans sought for shelter. Standing upright, some specimens may have reached 12 feet tall. These bears were primarily herbivorous, but like modern grizzlies, they were opportunistic and dangerous when threatened or hungry. The very caves that seem like obvious shelters to modern eyes might have been death traps if already occupied. The dire wolf, larger and more robust than modern wolves, hunted in packs. Archaeological evidence shows they were highly successful predators, their bone-crushing jaws capable of tackling prey much larger than themselves. A pack of dire wolves encountering a lone human would not hesitate. They would coordinate, cut off escape routes, and bring down their target with ruthless efficiency. Then there were the hyenas, but not the modern species we know from Africa. The cave hyena of the Pleistocene was a massive animal, more heavily built than contemporary spotted hyenas, with jaws powerful enough to crack the long bones of megafauna to access the marrow inside. Like modern hyenas, they were likely both hunters and scavengers, unafraid to steal kills from other predators or to attack weakened animals, including humans. Even the megafauna that were not predators posed enormous dangers. The woolly mammoth, while herbivorous, could be as dangerous as any modern elephant when agitated. Bulls in Must, the period of heightened aggression, would be absolutely lethal. The woolly rhinoceros, with its massive horn growing up to a meter in length, would charge at threats without hesitation. The giant bears, particularly the short-faced bear of North America, which stood perhaps 12 feet tall when upright, were among the largest land predators of their time. Now, imagine trying to defend yourself against any of these creatures with Stone Age technology. You have no metal, no firearms, not even the compound bows of later eras. You might have, if you are extremely lucky and skilled, a spear with a stone point. This spear is your primary weapon, tool, and defense. It requires close proximity to use effectively. To thrust it into a charging predator, you must stand your ground against something that outweighs you several times over, something driven by hunger or territorial aggression, something that sees you not as human with rights and consciousness, but as food or threat. The stone tools of the Paleolithic were remarkable achievements of human ingenuity, but they had severe limitations. A spear point might penetrate deep enough to wound, but not to stop a charging animal immediately. Projectile weapons like the atlatl, a spear thrower that increases range and force, appeared only in the later Paleolithic. Even then, accuracy required years of practice. You do not have years. You do not even have days of practice. You have the weapon in your hand and a predator that has decided you are dinner. Stone Age people dealt with these threats through multiple strategies. They stayed in groups. A lone human is vulnerable, but a group of humans with weapons, making loud noises, and appearing larger than they are, might dissuade an attack. They used fire as a deterrent, maintaining flames through the night because most predators, then as now, avoided fire instinctively. They learned the territories and behaviors of local predators, knowing where not to go, when to be especially vigilant, what signs indicated danger. But most crucially, they were raised from birth in this world. They learned as children which animal tracks meant danger, which sounds in the night required action, how to read the behavior of prey animals who often served as early warning systems for predators. Their senses were honed by constant use. Their reaction times were faster because their nervous systems had been trained from infancy. Their very posture and movement patterns marked them as potential threats rather than easy prey. You have none of these advantages. Your senses are dulled by a lifetime of safety. You cannot tell a lion's print from a dog's paw mark. The snapping of a twig behind you might be nothing, or it might be something with jaws that can crush your skull, investigating a potential meal. You do not know which sounds are normal forest noise and which ones are warning cries. You cannot estimate how far away a roar might be, or whether an animal is moving toward or away from you. Recent research has confirmed that humans were apex predators for about 2 million years, specializing in hunting large game. But being an apex predator does not mean being invincible. It means occupying the top level of the food chain as a species, but individual humans, especially those unprepared and alone, were absolutely vulnerable to predation. Archaeological evidence of human remains showing tooth marks from large carnivores, bones broken in patterns consistent with predation, tells us that our ancestors were sometimes on the menu. The terror of this situation cannot be overstated. In our world, even those who live in areas with dangerous wildlife can call for help, seek medical attention if injured, use modern weapons for defense, or simply leave the area entirely. You have none of these options. When night falls and you hear something large moving in the darkness beyond your small fire, assuming you have managed to make fire at all, you can only hope it loses interest. You cannot call anyone. You cannot drive away. You cannot even see properly because your eyes, adapted to artificial light, cannot pierce the absolute darkness that existed before electric illumination. The psychological weight of being prey is something modern humans simply do not experience. We worry about many things: health, finances, relationships, but we do not lie awake wondering if something is going to eat us. That constant low-level fear, occasionally spiking into outright terror, would be your companion every moment of your Stone Age existence, however brief that existence might be. It would drain your energy, cloud your judgment, make sleep difficult, and potentially lead to fatal mistakes born of panic or exhaustion. But even if you somehow avoided becoming a meal, even if you managed to use fire and numbers and sheer luck to keep the predators at bay, you would still face another challenge equally daunting. You would need to eat, and getting food in the Stone Age was nothing like a trip to the grocery store. The impossible hunt. Hunger has a way of sharpening the senses and clouding judgment in equal measure. In the modern world, we experience hunger as a mild discomfort, an irritation that signals it is time for our next meal. True hunger, the kind that persists for days and begins to consume your body's own reserves, is something few people in developed nations ever experience. In the Stone Age, hunger was a constant companion, a force that drove every decision and shaped every day. Let us be generous and assume you have somehow survived your first night. You have managed to create fire, found temporary shelter that protected you from the worst of the cold and kept predators at a distance. Now, with dawn breaking over a frozen landscape, you face a fundamental problem. You need to eat, and nothing around you looks like food in the way you understand the term. There is no refrigerator to raid, no restaurant to visit, no convenience store on the corner. Every calorie you consume must be taken from an environment that offers nothing freely. You must either hunt animals or gather plants, and both present challenges for which you are spectacularly unprepared. Consider hunting first. Stone Age people were, according to recent research, specialized carnivores for millions of years. They relied heavily on meat, particularly from large animals, because the fat and protein content provided enormous caloric density. A successful hunt of a mammoth or a large deer could feed a group for days or even weeks. But these hunts were not casual undertakings. They required skills honed over a lifetime, tools crafted with precision, intimate knowledge of animal behavior, and often the coordinated effort of multiple people. You have none of this expertise. You do not know where animals congregate to drink, what paths they follow when migrating, which signs indicate their recent presence. You cannot read tracks beyond perhaps identifying that something walked through the area. You do not know how to move silently through brush and snow, how to approach from downwind so your scent does not alert prey, how to predict where an animal will go when startled. Every aspect of hunting is a mystery to you. Let us say impossibly that you encounter an animal, perhaps a deer, which seems manageable compared to a mammoth. With what will you kill it? Your Stone Age spear, assuming you somehow manage to craft one, is a simple weapon requiring close proximity. You must either get close enough to thrust it into vital areas or throw it with enough force and accuracy to cause mortal injury. Both require skills that take years to develop. Modern bow hunting, even with compound bows and laser sights and years of practice, has a success rate that varies widely, but is often below 50% for experienced hunters. You, with a thrown spear, have essentially no chance of a successful kill from distance. If you try to get close, the deer's senses, far sharper than yours, will detect you long before you are in range. Deer can smell human scent from hundreds of yards away. They can hear the slightest sound of your approach. Their vision, while not as sharp as ours in detail, excels at detecting movement. You would need to be nearly on top of the animal before attempting your attack, an impossible task without training. But suppose by a miracle you land a hit. Unless you strike the heart or sever a major artery, the animal will not die immediately. It will run, possibly for miles, while bleeding. Now you must track it, following blood trail through difficult terrain, hoping it weakens enough to approach again before it escapes entirely, or leads you into the territory of a predator attracted by the scent of blood. Stone Age hunters understood the patience required for this process. They could read the signs, estimating how badly an animal was wounded, whether to pursue immediately or allow it to weaken. You would likely lose the animal entirely, wasting your one opportunity and expending enormous energy in the attempt. Even if, against all odds, you successfully kill an animal, your challenges have only begun. The animal must be butchered immediately. Allowing meat to sit leads to rapid spoilage, even in ice, cold temperatures, and attracts scavengers. Butchering with stone tools requires specific techniques. The hide must be removed carefully to preserve its usefulness, a process requiring sharp-flaked stone blades and considerable skill. Internal organs must be accessed and removed, some edible and nutritious, others potentially toxic if damaged. The meat must be separated from the carcass in manageable portions. Archaeological evidence shows that Stone Age people used every part of an animal. Nothing was wasted because waste meant potential starvation. Bones were cracked for marrow, a rich source of fat. Hides became clothing and shelter. Sinew became binding and thread. Antlers and bones became tools. To do this properly requires knowledge passed down through generations, an understanding of anatomy and material properties that you simply do not possess. And this assumes you are hunting alone, which in reality would be suicidal. Stone Age hunting was typically a communal activity. Groups of hunters would coordinate, driving animals into kill zones, surrounding them, using numbers to overwhelm prey's natural defenses. Some evidence suggests hunters used fire to drive game, creating deliberate landscape changes that funneled animals toward waiting spears. At sites like Roche de Saloutré in France, hunters used the same location for tens of thousands of years, building fires to corral migrating horses and reindeer into a narrow valley where they could be killed safely. You are not part of such a group. You do not have the generations of accumulated knowledge about local geography and animal behavior. You are alone, or perhaps with other moderns equally ignorant, facing animals that are faster, stronger, and better adapted to this environment than you could ever be. Perhaps then, gathering plants seems more feasible, Surely picking berries and digging roots requires less specialized knowledge than hunting. This assumption would be dangerously wrong. The plant life of the Paleolithic was not the carefully cultivated, selectively bred crops we know today. These were wild plants, many of which are toxic, some lethally so. You would need to know which mushrooms are safe, which berries will nourish rather than poison, which roots can be eaten, and which will cause organ failure. Stone Age people had this knowledge. They learned it from childhood, testing small amounts carefully, observing what animals ate, passing successful identifications down through oral tradition. Even then, mistakes happened. You, dropped into this world without preparation, would essentially be playing botanical Russian roulette with every plant you encountered. Many wild plants are extremely nutritious, but only after proper preparation. Some must be soaked repeatedly to leach out toxins. Others require cooking at specific temperatures. Eating them raw or improperly prepared could make you violently ill, causing vomiting and diarrhea that would dehydrate and weaken you, potentially fatally. Moreover, plant food in the Ice Age was scarce. We are not talking about the verdant forests of tropical regions or the abundant grasslands of warmer periods. During glacial maximums, much of the landscape was tundra or steppe, with limited plant diversity. Edible plants would be small, scattered, and seasonal. You might walk for hours gathering enough calories to sustain you for a single day, assuming you could correctly identify what was safe to eat. Archaeological evidence shows that humans did consume plants throughout the Paleolithic, but they were not the primary calorie source in colder regions. Meat was the staple because it provided dense nutrition and could be stored through smoking or freezing. But acquiring meat required the hunting skills we have already established you do not possess. This creates an impossible situation. You need food to maintain the energy required to hunt and gather, but hunting and gathering, especially without knowledge or tools, expend more energy than they provide. You enter a caloric deficit almost immediately. Your body begins consuming its own muscle and fat. Your movements become slower, your thinking more muddled. Each day you fail to secure adequate food makes the next day's attempt even more difficult. Stone Age people also faced periods of scarcity. They understood feast and famine, gorging when food was available, and enduring lean times when it was not. But they had strategies for surviving these periods. They knew how to extend food through careful preservation, smoking, and drying meat to make it last. They knew which locations would have food when others failed. They had the social bonds to share resources within their group. Most importantly, they had bodies adapted to periods of low food intake, metabolisms that could slow to conserve energy during famines. Your modern body is adapted to reliable food access. Your metabolism expects regular meals. When deprived, it does not smoothly shift into conservation mode. Instead, it sends overwhelming signals of hunger, impacts your cognitive function, and burns through your limited reserves quickly. Studies of modern people attempting to survive on foraged food, even in relatively abundant environments with preparation and knowledge, show how difficult it is to meet caloric needs through gathering alone. The final cruel irony is this: even if you somehow acquired food, consuming it could make you sick. Your digestive system is accustomed to cooked, often processed foods. Raw or poorly prepared meat carries parasites and bacteria. Without the ability to cook properly, without knowledge of safe food handling, every meal could be your last. Trichinosis from undercooked meat, bacterial infections from spoiled food, parasitic infestations from contaminated water, all of these would turn your desperate attempts at nutrition into vectors for disease. And disease, as we are about to explore, is perhaps the most insidious threat you would face in the Stone Age. Because unlike predators or starvation, disease is invisible until it has already taken hold. And once it does, without modern medicine, there is very little hope for recovery. The invisible killers. Picture a small cut on your hand, perhaps earned while trying to craft a stone tool, or during the fumbling process of butchering an animal. In our modern world, such an injury is barely worth noting. You might wash it under running water, perhaps apply an antiseptic ointment, cover it with a bandage. Within a few days, your body's natural healing processes will have closed the wound, and you will forget it ever existed. In the Stone Age, this same tiny cut could be your death sentence. The microscopic world of bacteria, viruses, and parasites existed long before humans walked the earth, and these organisms had millions of years to evolve strategies for infection, reproduction, and survival. Stone Age people carried an enormous burden of disease, but they had something you lack: immune systems that had encountered these pathogens before, either personally or through genetic inheritance from ancestors who survived similar infections. Your immune system, shaped by a life in sanitized environments with access to vaccines and antibiotics, is woefully unprepared for what awaits in the past. Let us start with the most immediate threat: wound infections. In the Stone Age, there were no antibiotics, no antiseptics, no sterile environments. Every wound, no matter how minor, was exposed to bacteria from the environment, from the tools you used, from your own hands. Simple cuts could easily become infected with Streptococcus or Staphylococcus bacteria. What begins as a small injury becomes red and swollen, pus forming as your body attempts to fight the infection. Without antibiotics, the infection can spread, entering your bloodstream and causing sepsis. Sepsis is a systemic response to infection where your entire body enters a state of inflammation. Your blood pressure drops, your organs begin to fail, and you can die within days. In modern hospitals, even with every medical intervention available, sepsis still claims many lives. In the Stone Age, with no treatment possible, a simple infected cut would have a high likelihood of becoming fatal. But infections from wounds were just the beginning. The Stone Age world was full of pathogens that modern medicine has largely conquered or controlled. Tuberculosis, a bacterial disease that attacks the lungs, has been found in human remains dating back thousands of years. This disease spreads through the air when infected individuals cough or sneeze. In close quarters, sharing caves or small shelters during harsh weather, the disease would spread rapidly through a group. Without treatment, tuberculosis slowly destroys lung tissue, causing a wasting disease where victims literally cough up pieces of their lungs, drowning in their own blood and fluids. Consider also the parasites. Intestinal worms were nearly universal among ancient populations. These organisms, transmitted through contaminated food and water, take up residence in your digestive system. Some species can grow to enormous lengths, consuming the nutrients from your food and leaving you perpetually malnourished no matter how much you eat. Others migrate through your body, with some species capable of reaching your lungs, liver, or even brain. The symptoms range from mild discomfort to severe pain, organ damage, and death. Giardia, a parasitic infection spread through contaminated water, causes explosive diarrhea that can lead to dangerous dehydration. In the modern world, this is unpleasant but treatable. In the Stone Age, severe diarrhea could kill within days, especially if you were already weakened by cold or hunger. The water sources you would depend on, streams and rivers, were the same water sources used by animals that defecated upstream. Every drink was a gamble. Salmonella and other bacterial infections from improperly stored or prepared food would be constant threats. Remember, you have no refrigeration, no understanding of bacterial growth, no way to safely preserve food except through methods you do not know how to execute properly. The meat you struggle so hard to acquire could make you violently ill if not handled correctly. Then there are the zoonotic diseases, illnesses that jump from animals to humans. Spending your days in close contact with animal carcasses, sleeping in caves that might have previously housed animals, and living among wildlife created countless opportunities for disease transmission. Anthrax, transmitted through contact with infected animals, causes severe illness and often death. Rabies, transmitted through the bite of infected animals, is almost universally fatal once symptoms appear. Without modern post-exposure prophylaxis, a bite from a rabid wolf or fox would be a slow, horrifying death sentence as the virus makes its way to your brain. Stone Age people also suffered from diseases we can identify in their skeletal remains. Osteoarthritis, the degeneration of joint cartilage, was extremely common. This was not the osteoarthritis of old age that we see today. This was severe joint damage appearing in people in their 20s and 30s. the result of constant physical labor, repeated injuries, and the stress placed on the body by survival activities. Walking would become painful, then excruciating. Your mobility, already compromised by lack of knowledge and proper equipment, would deteriorate further. Dental disease was another universal affliction. The Stone Age diet, while free of refined sugars, involved enormous wear on teeth, grit from stone tools used to process food, the grinding of tough plant materials, and the lack of any dental care meant that teeth wore down to nubs. Abscesses formed where bacteria entered through cracks in the enamel. These infections could spread to the jawbone and then to the bloodstream, causing the same sepsis we discussed earlier. The pain of an abscessed tooth is excruciating, making eating difficult or impossible, further contributing to malnutrition. Vitamin deficiencies would plague you almost immediately. Scurvy, caused by lack of vitamin C, would set in within months without access to fresh fruits or vegetables. Your gums would become spongy and bleed, old wounds would reopen, and eventually you would suffer from anemia and death. Rickets from vitamin D deficiency would weaken your bones, particularly problematic in the limited sunlight of glacial periods or if you spent extended time in sheltered areas trying to escape the cold. The psychological toll of constant illness cannot be understated. Imagine living every day with some degree of physical discomfort or pain. Your head aches from dehydration or a low-grade infection. Your stomach cramps from parasites. Your joints throb from the cold and overuse. Your teeth send shooting pains through your jaw. Your wounds itch and burn as they struggle to heal. There is no aspirin, no pain relief of any kind, except perhaps chewing certain plant materials, assuming you know which ones and can find them. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer populations, which serve as our best proxy for Stone Age life, show that minor ailments were constant. What we consider minor, however, could easily become major without medical intervention. A cold could become pneumonia, a stomach bug could cause fatal dehydration, a skin infection could spread until it consumed entire limbs. The Stone Age people had accumulated some medical knowledge, certainly. They understood basic wound care, using materials like moss as bandages, some of which actually had natural antiseptic properties. They knew which plants had analgesic or healing properties. Archaeological evidence shows they performed surgeries, including trepanation, drilling holes in the skull, possibly to relieve pressure or treat head injuries. Some patients survived these procedures, the bone showing evidence of healing, but this knowledge took generations to accumulate and was passed down through careful observation and teaching. You do not have access to this knowledge base. You do not know which plants help and which harm. You do not know how to properly clean a wound with available materials. You certainly do not know how to perform any kind of surgical procedure. Each illness or injury would be faced with only your modern knowledge, which is extensive in theory, but useless without the tools and materials it assumes. Moreover, your immune system lacks the specific adaptations that Stone Age people developed. They were exposed to these pathogens from birth. Their bodies learned to recognize and fight common infections. They developed some degree of resistance through survival. Those who could not fight off infections died, and those who could passed on their genes. You are stepping into this environment with an immune system trained to fight very different battles, exposed to very different pathogens. Recent research has also suggested that the microbiome, the collection of bacteria and other organisms that live in and on our bodies, was quite different in ancient populations. These organisms play crucial roles in digestion, immune function, and overall health. Your modern microbiome, shaped by antibiotics, processed foods, and sanitized environments, might struggle to process the foods available in the Stone Age. You might suffer from constant digestive upset even when eating safe foods, simply because your gut bacteria are not adapted to handle them. The final terrifying aspect of Stone Age disease is the lack of any safety net. In our world, if you become seriously ill, you seek medical care. You receive treatments, medications, supportive care that keeps you alive while your body fights the infection. In the Stone Age, becoming seriously ill meant you became a burden to your group. You could not contribute to hunting, gathering, or other necessary tasks. If you were alone, you simply died. If you were with a group, they might care for you if resources allowed, but during times of scarcity, the calculations became brutal. the group's survival might require leaving the seriously ill behind. This is not cruelty in the way we understand it. It is the harsh mathematics of survival. A group traveling to follow game or escape harsh conditions could not afford to slow down for someone who might not recover. The decision to help or abandon the sick was a matter of collective survival, and while evidence suggests Stone Age people did care for their injured and ill, showing compassion that speaks to the depth of human social bonds, there were limits to what was possible. Disease was not a dramatic, immediate threat like a charging predator. It was insidious, weakening you gradually, creating vulnerabilities that would make every other challenge more difficult. An infected wound might slow your movements, making you more vulnerable to predators. Parasites might leave you too weak to hunt effectively. Dental pain might make eating so difficult that you suffered malnutrition even when food was available. Disease compounded every other problem you faced. And for women in the Stone Age, there was an additional medical challenge that carried perhaps the highest risk of all. A challenge that, for much of human history, was one of the leading causes of death among women of childbearing age. We are talking about pregnancy and childbirth, acts that in the modern world are managed with sophisticated medical care, but in the Stone Age were journeys into mortal danger. The deadly lottery of reproduction. For women transported to the Stone Age, pregnancy represented a unique and terrifying threat. In our modern world, while childbirth still carries risks, medical advances have made it relatively safe. Hospital births with trained obstetricians, emergency surgical capabilities, blood transfusions, antibiotics for infections, and pain management have reduced maternal mortality dramatically. In the Stone Age, giving birth was one of the most dangerous things a woman would ever do, and she would likely do it multiple times throughout her reproductive years. The statistics are sobering. Research examining skeletal remains and modern hunter-gatherer populations suggests that maternal mortality rates in the Stone Age could have been as high as 1 in 8 to 1 in 15 births. This means that a woman who gave birth to 5 children had a very real chance, perhaps 30 to 40%, of dying during one of those births. For context, in modern developed nations, maternal mortality is approximately 15 to 20 deaths per 100,000 live births. In the Stone Age, it was thousands of times higher. The reasons for this mortality were numerous. Human childbirth is inherently difficult because of our evolutionary history. When our ancestors became bipedal, walking upright on 2 legs, the shape of the pelvis changed to support this new posture. At the same time, our brains were growing larger, requiring bigger skulls. These 2 evolutionary pressures created a situation where human infants have large heads that must pass through a relatively narrow birth canal. It is a tight fit even in the best circumstances. In the Stone Age, complications during labor had no medical solutions. If a baby was positioned incorrectly, breech or sideways, there was no way to perform a cesarean section. The mother would labor for days, becoming exhausted, dehydrated, and eventually dying along with the infant. If the birth canal was too narrow, whether due to the mother's own physical structure or previous injuries, the same outcome occurred. The baby could not be delivered, and both mother and child perished. Even in successful births, the risks continued. Postpartum hemorrhaging, excessive bleeding after delivery, is a leading cause of maternal death even today. In the Stone Age, there was no way to stop severe bleeding. The women would simply bleed out while the group watched helplessly. Infections after childbirth, particularly if there were tears or if the placenta did not deliver completely, could cause the same sepsis we discussed earlier. Childbirth fever, caused by bacterial infection of the uterus, killed countless women in the days and weeks following delivery. For the infants themselves, survival was far from guaranteed. Infant mortality rates were staggeringly high, with estimates suggesting that 30 to 40% of children died before reaching age 5. And most of those deaths occurred in the first year of life. Some of this mortality was due to congenital issues that today would be treatable, but then were death sentences. Some was due to infections, premature birth, or complications during delivery, and some, tragically, was due to infanticide. This last point requires careful discussion. In a world of scarce resources, where the survival of the group depended on mobility and every member contributing, child born with severe disabilities, or during a time when the mother could not adequately care for it, might not be allowed to live. This was not done out of cruelty, but out of the brutal calculus of survival. If caring for an infant would endanger the existing children, or the mother herself, the group might make the terrible decision to let the infant die. Some evidence suggests that twins, who would be an enormous burden in terms of resources and mobility, were often not both allowed to survive. Breastfeeding, the only way to feed an infant, presented its own challenges. Without modern formula or even access to animal milk from domesticated herds, a mother's milk was the sole source of nutrition. If the mother died, the infant would die, unless another lactating woman in the group could take over nursing, something that was possible in close-knit bands but not always feasible. If the mother was malnourished, her milk production might be inadequate, leading to a slowly starving infant. The process of weaning was also dangerous. Introducing solid foods to a child with a developing immune system in an environment full of pathogens led to high mortality during this transition period. Children who survived nursing often died when transitioning to the same contaminated food and water that adults consumed. Their smaller bodies could not fight off infections as effectively, and they succumbed to diseases that adults might survive. For women of childbearing age, pregnancy was not something that happened once or twice. Without modern contraception, women who survived childbirth would likely become pregnant again relatively soon, especially given that breastfeeding, while it can suppress ovulation, is not a reliable contraceptive. A woman might go through a dozen pregnancies in her lifetime, each one another roll of the deadly dice. The physical toll of repeated pregnancies on Stone Age women's bodies was severe. Calcium depletion from supporting fetal bone development and nursing led to weakened bones and teeth. Pelvic injuries from difficult births might never fully heal, causing chronic pain and mobility issues. The constant cycle of pregnancy, birth, and nursing, while also performing the physical labor required for survival, gathering, processing hides, maintaining shelters, left women's bodies worn and aged beyond their years. Male mortality also followed distinct patterns. While men did not face the specific threat of childbirth, they faced higher risks from hunting injuries, violence, and accidents. Archaeological evidence shows that males had higher rates of traumatic injuries, broken bones, skull fractures, and wound marks, likely from both hunting and intergroup violence. The division of labor in Stone Age societies, while not as rigid as once believed, generally placed men in roles that involved more direct confrontation with dangerous animals and potentially hostile groups. But regardless of gender, childhood in the Stone Age was a gauntlet of threats. Those who survived infancy still faced years of vulnerability. Malnutrition, stunted growth, diseases that adults might recover from killed children, accidents, falls, drowning, burns from fires, claimed many young lives. The archaeological record is full of tiny skeletons, children who never reached adulthood, each one representing a family's grief and a life cut short. For you, dropped into this world, the reality of reproduction would be inescapable. If you were a woman of childbearing age, pregnancy would be an ever-present possibility and a terrifying prospect. Without the medical safety net you have always known, every pregnancy could be your last. If you were a man, watching a partner or group member go through childbirth, knowing there was nothing you could do if complications arose, would be its own form of psychological torture. And for any modern person, witnessing infant and child mortality at rates so much higher than anything we experience today would be profoundly traumatic. In our world, we expect children to survive. In the Stone Age, you would expect many of them to die, and that expectation, that constant grief, would fundamentally change your psychology. But even if you somehow avoided disease, escaped predators, found adequate food, and survived the reproductive lottery, you would still face the simple, grinding reality of daily existence in the Stone Age, the sheer physical labor required to stay alive, day after day, without rest, without modern tools, without any of the conveniences we take for granted. This daily grind might not be as dramatic as facing a saber-toothed cat, but it would be just as deadly in its own way. The unending physical ordeal. Imagine for a moment that you have survived longer than seemed possible. You have somehow made it through the first brutal night, evaded predators, secured enough food to keep moving, and avoided serious illness. You might feel a glimmer of hope, thinking perhaps you can adapt to this harsh world. That hope would be crushed by the reality of what comes next. The endless back-breaking physical labor that defined every single day of Stone Age existence. In our modern lives, physical labor is largely optional. Many of us spend our days sitting at desks, our most strenuous activities perhaps going to the gym or taking a walk. Even those who work physically demanding jobs have tools, machines, and equipment that multiply their efforts. They work shifts with defined hours and then return home to shelter that requires no effort to maintain, with food available at the opening of a refrigerator. The Stone Age offered none of these luxuries. Every single thing you needed to survive required direct physical effort, and that effort never stopped. Let us start with shelter. You cannot simply find a cave and call it home. Caves in prime locations, those that were dry, protected from wind, and near water sources, were already occupied, either by other humans or by the dangerous animals we discussed earlier. Even if you found a suitable cave, it would need significant work to make it habitable. The floor would need to be cleared of animal droppings and debris, bedding would need to be created from materials you gathered, and the entrance might need to be partially blocked to keep out wind and snow, while maintaining ventilation for your fire. More likely, you would need to construct a shelter from scratch. And Stone Age people built various types of dwellings, depending on their environment and resources. In areas with large game, they might construct huts using mammoth bones as the framework, covering them with hides and turf. In forested regions, they might create lean-tos from branches and bark, but all of these required both knowledge you do not have and physical labor that would exhaust you. Consider the process of building even a simple shelter. You would need to cut or gather long, straight branches or poles, a task requiring stone tools you barely know how to use. These poles would need to be secured in the ground and lashed together with cordage you would have to make by hand from plant fibers or animal sinew. The covering, whether hides or layers of bark and grass, would need to be collected, prepared, and attached. The entire process might take days or even weeks, and during that time, you would be exposed to the elements, working until your hands bled and your back screamed in agony. And this shelter is not permanent in the way we think of homes. Stone Age people were often semi-nomadic, following game and seasonal resources. When it came time to move, you might need to abandon your shelter or disassemble it to carry the valuable materials with you. Then, at the new location, you would build again. This cycle repeated throughout your life, assuming you lived long enough to complete even one migration. Fire, as we discussed earlier, was essential for survival, but maintaining it was a full-time job. You would need to gather firewood constantly. This means venturing into surrounding areas, identifying dead wood that would burn well, carrying it back to your shelter, often through snow or across difficult terrain. A single day's fire might require you to gather and carry hundreds of pounds of wood. Your shoulders would ache from the weight, your hands would crack and bleed from the rough bark, and you would need to do this every single day without fail. Then there was the preparation of food, which in the Stone Age was far more involved than anything we do today. If you managed to hunt an animal, that was just the beginning. The animal had to be butchered entirely with stone tools. This meant hours of cutting, scraping, and sawing through tough hide, muscle, and bone. The meat had to be processed quickly to prevent spoilage, either by cooking it immediately, which required maintaining an adequate fire, or by smoking and drying it, which required additional infrastructure and knowledge. The hides from any animal you killed were far too valuable to waste. They were your potential clothing, bedding, and shelter material. But turning a raw hide into usable leather was an intensive process. First, the hide had to be scraped clean of all fat and tissue, a task that could take a full day for a large animal. Then it had to be tanned, a process involving rubbing animal brains or other materials into the hide, working it constantly to keep it supple as it dried, stretching and manipulating it for hours. Your arms would burn with fatigue, your fingers would cramp, and the smell would be overwhelming, a pungent mixture of decay and chemicals that you would never escape. Making tools was another constant necessity. Stone tools do not last forever. They chip, break, and dull with use. You would need to constantly manufacture replacements, This required finding the right type of stone, usually flint or obsidian, carrying it back to your camp, and then carefully knapping it, striking it with another stone to create sharp flakes and edges. This is a skill that modern archaeologists train for years to master. And even then, they cannot match the efficiency of Stone Age craftspeople who learned from childhood. Each failed attempt would waste precious material. Each successful tool would take hours to create. And you would need many tools, cutting tools, scraping tools, piercing tools, specialized implements for different tasks. Without metal, everything wore out quickly and needed replacement. Your hands would be constantly cut from the sharp edges you were trying to create, adding the risk of infection to the burden of labor. Clothing required similar effort. If you managed to tan hides successfully, you would then need to cut them into appropriate shapes and sew them together. This required making needles from bone or ivory, a delicate process of grinding and polishing. You needed thread from sinew or plant fibers, which had to be processed and twisted by hand. Then came the actual sewing, pushing bone needles through tough leather, pulling thread through each hole, creating garments that fit well enough to provide warmth without restricting movement. A single outfit might take weeks to complete, and you would need multiple layers for adequate protection from the cold. Water acquisition, something we accomplish with a turn of a tap, required constant effort. You needed to know where to find clean water sources, travel to them regularly, and carry water back in containers you had to make yourself, likely from animal stomachs or bladders, or from tightly woven baskets sealed with plant resins. Each trip for water might be a journey of hours, carrying heavy loads that would strain your back and shoulders. The physical toll of this constant labor on an unprepared modern body would be catastrophic. You are not conditioned for this level of activity. Your muscles, used to sitting or at most moderate exercise, would be screaming within hours. You would develop blisters on your hands that would burst and become infected. Your back would seize up from bending and lifting. Your knees and ankles, subjected to constant walking over uneven ground, would swell and ache. Your feet, unused to going without modern supportive footwear, would be torn and bloody. And there was no rest. You could not decide to take a day off. Every day you did not gather firewood was a night you might freeze. Every day you did not work on your shelter was another night exposed to the elements. Every day you did not process food was a day closer to starvation. The work was endless, a grinding cycle that consumed every waking hour and left you collapsed in exhaustion when darkness finally made further work impossible. Archaeological evidence of Stone Age skeletons reveals the physical cost of this lifestyle. Researchers have found evidence of severe osteoarthritis in individuals in their 20s and 30s, joint damage that today we associate with elderly people, or those who have performed heavy manual labor for decades. Spinal compression, damage to vertebrae from constant heavy lifting and carrying, was common. Muscle attachment points on bones show unusual development, indicating muscles built up from repetitive stress. Modern people attempting to live like Stone Age hunter-gatherers, even with preparation, knowledge, and the safety net of being able to quit, report that the physical demands are overwhelming. One recent study of individuals attempting to live on foraged food found that participants lost an average of 20 pounds in just a few months. Despite eating as much as they could find, the energy expenditure simply exceeded what they could acquire, even with modern knowledge helping them. For you, without preparation, this imbalance would be even more severe. You would be burning thousands of calories per day just trying to survive, while your ability to acquire food would be severely limited. Your body would begin to consume itself, muscle and fat disappearing as you grew weaker. Tasks that were difficult on the first day would become impossible by the second week. Your movements would slow, your coordination would suffer, and you would enter a death spiral where weakness made work harder, which made you weaker still. The psychological impact of unending labor without rest or hope of improvement would be its own form of torture. There would be no weekend, no vacation, no retirement. There would only be work until you could not work anymore, and then you would die. Every modern person has experienced exhaustion, but few have experienced the kind of total physical depletion that comes from weeks of inadequate food combined with excessive labor. It breaks something in the mind as surely as it breaks the body. And you would be doing all of this labor, remember, while also maintaining constant vigilance for predators, while fighting off illness, while enduring cold that made every movement painful. Each challenge compounded the others. The work made you more vulnerable to predators because exhaustion slowed your reactions. The cold made the work harder because your fingers became numb and your muscles stiff. The hunger made everything more difficult because your body had no fuel for the effort required. Stone Age people were adapted to this life. They were raised performing these tasks, their bodies conditioned from childhood, their knowledge deep and complete. They worked together in groups, sharing the burden and the knowledge. They had generations of refinement in their techniques, making their efforts more efficient. And even with all these advantages, their lives were short and hard, their bodies worn out by middle age. You have none of their advantages. You would be facing these challenges alone or with other equally unprepared individuals. Every task would take you twice as long and produce half the results. You would waste precious energy on failed attempts, learning through brutal trial and error lessons that Stone Age children absorbed naturally over years of observation and practice. But perhaps most crushing of all would be the isolation, the loneliness, and the understanding that your survival depended not just on your own efforts, but on being part of a functioning social group, something that, as we are about to explore, would be nearly impossible for a modern person to integrate into successfully. The social contract of survival humans are fundamentally social creatures. We evolved to live in groups, to cooperate, to share knowledge and resources. This social nature was not merely a nice feature of Stone Age life. It was the foundation upon which survival rested. A lone human in the Paleolithic was a dead human, almost without exception. But being part of a Stone Age group required more than just physical presence. It required fitting into complex social structures, understanding unspoken rules, and contributing in ways that you, as a modern person, would be utterly incapable of providing. The typical Stone Age group, often called a band, consisted of roughly 20 to 50 individuals, usually extended family groups related by blood or marriage. These were not random collections of individuals, but carefully organized social units where everyone had roles, relationships, and responsibilities. These groups provided the cooperation necessary for successful hunting, the knowledge sharing that kept ancient wisdom alive, the defense against threats, and the social bonds that made the harsh life bearable. Imagine trying to integrate into such a group without preparation. You do not speak their language. Stone Age people did not speak English or any modern language. They spoke languages that have been dead for tens of thousands of years, languages that evolved and changed as groups migrated and split. Without the ability to communicate verbally, you would be severely handicapped. You could not ask for help, could not explain your situation, could not learn from their instruction. You would be reduced to pointing and pantomiming like a child, but without a child's capacity for rapid language acquisition. Even if you could somehow learn to communicate, you would have nothing to offer the group. In Stone Age societies, everyone contributed according to their abilities and knowledge. Children learned by helping and observing, gradually taking on more responsibility. Adults were skilled in the tasks necessary for survival. What can you contribute? You cannot hunt effectively. You cannot gather efficiently because you do not know which plants are safe. You cannot craft tools or clothing properly. You cannot even maintain a fire reliably. You would be a burden, consuming resources without providing return. In a world of abundance, this might not matter, but Stone Age life existed on the edge of scarcity constantly. Every mouth to feed was a calculation. Groups might care for their injured or elderly out of social bonds and the knowledge that they had contributed in the past and might contribute again. But an outsider who provided nothing. The group would have no obligation to support you and every practical reason to drive you away or simply refuse to share the food their efforts secured. Let us imagine, impossibly, that a group took you in out of curiosity or compassion. You would still face enormous social challenges. Stone Age societies had complex social structures with hierarchies, gender roles, and expectations that you would not understand. Violating social norms, even unknowingly, could result in punishment, ostracism, or expulsion. Making direct eye contact might be seen as aggression. Touching someone's tools without permission might be a serious offense. The distribution of food likely followed specific rules based on status. contribution, and kinship. Taking food out of turn or in the wrong amount could cause serious conflict. Gender roles in Stone Age societies were likely more flexible than once believed, but there were still divisions of labor. Men primarily hunted large game, though women and children might participate. Women gathered plant foods, processed hides, cared for children, and contributed to small game hunting and fishing. These were not rigid rules, but patterns of contribution. You, not knowing these patterns, would constantly be making mistakes, doing the wrong things at the wrong times, or failing to do what was expected. The Stone Age world was also not peaceful. Evidence suggests that violence between groups was common. Competition for resources, particularly during times of scarcity, led to raids and conflicts. Groups had territories that they defended, and encountering another band could be deadly. Stone Age people could recognize members of their own group instantly by appearance, behavior, and marking. You would be immediately identifiable as an outsider, and outsiders were potential threats to be driven off or killed. Studies of skeletal remains from the Paleolithic show evidence of violent deaths, skulls with fractures from clubs or stones, rib cages pierced by spear points, individuals with multiple traumatic injuries consistent with warfare or execution. The rate of violent death in some Stone Age populations may have been as high as 10 to 20%, far exceeding anything seen in modern societies outside of active war zones. For you, this means that encountering any group of Stone Age people would be potentially lethal. You could not explain that you meant no harm, that you were just lost and confused. You would simply be a stranger in their territory, a threat to be eliminated before you could steal resources or bring danger to their group. And you would have no way to defend yourself. You lack the combat skills, the weapons, and the physical conditioning to fight effectively. Even within a group, if you somehow became part of one, social conflicts could be deadly. Disputes over food, over status, over partners could escalate to violence. Without the formal justice systems and social safety nets of modern societies, justice was immediate and personal. If you offended someone with more status or strength, they might simply attack you, and the group might not intervene. Banishment from the group for serious offenses or simply for being too much of a burden was a death sentence. Alone in the Stone Age world, your chances of survival measured in days at best. The psychological weight of this social precariousness would be immense. In our modern world, we have safety nets, police to call, laws to protect us, social services for those in need. We have the ability to move, to change communities, to exist as individuals if necessary. In the Stone Age, your survival was completely dependent on the goodwill of a small group of people who owed you nothing. The fear of rejection, of making a fatal social mistake, would be with you constantly. Stone Age people also had rich spiritual and cultural lives that you could not participate in. They had beliefs about the world, about spirits and forces, about proper behavior and taboos that shaped their understanding of reality. Violating these beliefs, even unknowingly, could mark you as dangerous or cursed. They had rituals, ceremonies, and practices that reinforced group cohesion and social bonds. Being unable to participate meaningfully in these aspects of life would keep you forever an outsider, never truly part of the community. The evidence of Stone Age social complexity is clear from their art, their burial practices, and their tool-making traditions. These people had fully modern brains, capable of abstract thought, complex language, and sophisticated social organization. They were not simpler or less intelligent than modern humans. They were just as human as you, but shaped by completely different circumstances and experiences. This made them capable of great cooperation and compassion within their groups, but it also made them potentially dangerous to outsiders who threatened their survival. For you, the modern person in the Stone Age, this social reality would be one more overwhelming challenge added to the physical and environmental ones. You would be isolated even if surrounded by people, unable to truly connect, constantly at risk of violating norms you could not understand, dependent on the mercy of those who had every practical reason to reject you. It would be loneliness and vulnerability on a scale difficult to comprehend. And all of this brings us to perhaps the most fundamental problem you would face, something so basic that we have barely mentioned it directly. Your modern body, your 21st century physiology, shaped by a life of comfort and security, is simply not built for the Stone Age. It lacks the adaptations, the conditioning, and the basic biological resilience that Stone Age people possessed. This, more than any other single factor, ensures that you would not survive. Your soft modern body. Let us talk honestly about your body, about the physical form you currently inhabit and how utterly inadequate it would be for Stone Age survival. This is not a judgment of your fitness or health by modern standards. You might be an athlete, someone who exercises regularly and takes pride in their physical condition. It does not matter. Your body, shaped by a lifetime in the modern world, is fundamentally different from a Stone Age body in ways that would quickly prove fatal. Start with your feet. Right now, unless you happen to be one of a tiny minority, your feet are weak, inflexible things, with arches that have been supported by shoes since you learned to walk. Your toes probably cannot spread widely. Your foot muscles have atrophied from a life encased in footwear. The soles of your feet are soft, sensitive to every stone and twig. Now, imagine walking barefoot across the Stone Age landscape, over frozen ground studded with rocks, through snow and ice, across rough terrain for miles every single day. Stone Age people went barefoot or wore simple moccasins that provided minimal protection. Their feet were toughened from childhood, with thick calluses that protected against cuts and cold. Their foot muscles were strong from constant use. Their toes could grip and spread, providing stability on uneven ground. Your feet would be torn and bleeding within hours. The pain would make walking excruciating, and the wounds would quickly become infected. Your hands tell a similar story. Unless you work in a manually intensive job, your hands are relatively soft. Your palms might coalesce slightly if you lift weights, but they have never gripped stone tools for hours while crafting implements, never spent entire days processing animal hides, never gathered firewood until your skin cracked and bled. Stone Age people had hands that were weathered and tough, capable of gripping rough materials without injury. Your hands would blister almost immediately from Stone Age labor, and those blisters would burst, leaving raw wounds that interfered with your ability to work. Then there is your overall physical conditioning. Modern people, even fit ones, are conditioned for specific types of exercise. You might run regularly, but running on treadmills or paved paths is nothing like traversing miles of rough terrain while carrying supplies. You might lift weights, but that bears little resemblance to the constant, varied physical labor of Stone Age life. Your cardiovascular system, your muscles, your joints, all are adapted to modern activity patterns with rest periods and recovery time. Stone Age survival allowed for neither. The metabolic differences would be equally significant. Your body expects regular meals, probably 3 a day plus snacks. When deprived of this steady fuel supply, your metabolism does not smoothly adapt. Instead, you experience intense hunger, brain fog, irritability, and weakness. Stone Age people had metabolisms adapted to feast and famine cycles. Their bodies could efficiently store energy during periods of abundance and then access those stores during lean times without the dramatic performance decline modern bodies experience. Your digestive system presents another vulnerability. You have spent your entire life eating cooked, often processed foods. Your gut bacteria, your digestive enzymes, your entire gastrointestinal system is adapted to this diet. Suddenly consuming tough, fibrous wild plants and partially cooked game meat would likely cause severe digestive distress. While your body might eventually adapt, the transition period would be marked by painful cramps, diarrhea, and inability to extract adequate nutrition from available foods. Consider also your immune system, which we touched on earlier, but deserves further examination. You have been vaccinated against many diseases. You have taken antibiotics that have altered your microbiome. You have lived in sanitized environments with limited exposure to the pathogens that were constant companions to Stone Age people. This means your immune system, while excellent at fighting the threats it knows, would be blindsided by ancient diseases. You lack the genetic adaptations that helped Stone Age people survive their disease environment. Research has shown that some modern human populations carry genetic traits inherited from ancient ancestors that provided disease resistance. Genes inherited from Neanderthals, for instance, may have helped modern humans adapt to European diseases when they first arrived on that continent. But you, without generations of exposure and selection, would face every pathogen as a novel threat. Your immune system would be constantly overwhelmed, fighting battles it was never prepared for. Your vitamin D production is another concern. Modern people, especially those living in northern latitudes, often have vitamin D deficiency, even with supplementation and fortified foods. In the Stone Age, during glacial periods with limited sunlight, getting adequate vitamin D would be even more challenging. Your body might struggle to produce enough, leading to weakened bones, impaired immune function, and general malaise that would make every other challenge harder. The way your body regulates temperature would also prove inadequate. Modern humans spend most of their time in climate-controlled environments. Your body has lost some of its ability to efficiently regulate temperature through extreme conditions. Stone Age people, constantly exposed to cold, had physiological adaptations. Their peripheral circulation was better adapted to prevent frostbite. Their bodies were more efficient at generating and conserving heat. You would feel the cold more intensely. Your body would burn through energy faster, trying to stay warm, and you would be more susceptible to hypothermia. Your eyesight presents yet another disadvantage. Many modern people wear corrective lenses. Without them, they are functionally impaired. In the Stone Age, there are no glasses, no contact lenses. If you are nearsighted, you cannot see predators or game at a distance. If you are farsighted, you cannot craft tools or process food effectively. Even if you have perfect vision, your eyes are adapted to looking at screens and objects at close range. Your distance vision, your peripheral awareness, your ability to track movement, all are likely inferior to someone raised scanning horizons for game and threats. The psychological adaptations matter as much as the physical ones. Your nervous system has been shaped by modern life. You are accustomed to safety, to predictability, to having time to process information and make decisions. The constant state of alertness required in the Stone Age, the need to make instant decisions about threats, the psychological weight of constant danger, would be overwhelming. Modern people in survival situations often report that mental fatigue and anxiety are as debilitating as physical exhaustion. Your pain tolerance is another factor. Modern people have pain medication readily available. We are not accustomed to enduring constant discomfort without relief. Stone Age people lived with aches, pains, minor injuries, and chronic conditions without reprieve. They had psychological adaptations that helped them continue functioning despite pain. You would likely be incapacitated by levels of discomfort that they simply worked through because they had no choice. Sleep patterns would also be different. Modern people typically sleep in one long block at night, in dark, quiet environments. Stone Age people likely slept differently, possibly in multiple shorter periods with watch rotations to guard against predators. They slept through cold, through noise, through discomfort that would keep modern people awake. Your inability to get adequate quality sleep would compound every other problem, leading to slower reactions, worse decisions, and declining health. Even your dental structure presents problems. Modern diets, while they cause cavities, do not wear teeth down as quickly as Stone Age diets. Your teeth, designed for soft foods, would struggle with the tough, gritty Stone Age diet. The wear on your molars would be accelerated, and you lack the jaw strength and bite force that Stone Age people developed. Eating would be more difficult, potentially leading to inadequate nutrition even when food was available. Your body composition is almost certainly wrong for Stone Age survival. Modern people, even athletic ones, tend to have more body fat and less muscle mass than Stone Age people. Studies of skeletal remains show that Paleolithic humans had robust bone structure indicating powerful musculature. They were lean, but not gaunt, with bodies built for constant movement and physical labor. Your body, whether carrying excess fat that would slow you down or lacking the muscle to perform necessary tasks efficiently, would be inadequate. The hormonal differences cannot be ignored either. Modern lifestyles affect hormone production in ways we are only beginning to understand. Chronic stress from modern life, exposure to artificial light that disrupts circadian rhythms, consumption of processed foods with additives and hormones, All these affect your endocrine system. Stone Age people had hormone profiles optimized for their lifestyle, with cortisol and adrenaline responses calibrated to real physical threats rather than the chronic low-level stress of modern life. Women would face specific physiological challenges. Modern women often begin menstruation earlier than historical populations, likely due to better nutrition. They also menstruate more frequently because they have fewer pregnancies and do not breastfeed as long. In the Stone Age, women might have menstruated only a few dozen times in their lives compared to the 400 or more cycles of modern women. Managing menstruation in Stone Age conditions, without modern hygiene products, while performing physical labor and facing exposure to cold, would be yet another significant challenge. For men, testosterone levels and physical strength would matter enormously. While modern men can be strong, the functional strength required for Stone Age survival, the ability to throw spears with lethal force, to carry heavy loads over distance, to engage in physical confrontations, requires development from youth. Modern strength training, while beneficial, does not replicate the specific adaptations needed. Your respiratory system would also struggle. Modern people, especially those in urban environments, often have compromised respiratory function from pollution exposure. Stone Age air was clean, and people developed strong respiratory systems from constant physical exertion at various altitudes. You would find yourself breathless and exhausted from activities that they performed easily. The aggregate of all these physical disadvantages means that you would be operating at perhaps 50% or less of the efficiency of a Stone Age person. Every task would take you twice as long, require twice as much effort, and produce inferior results. In an environment where efficiency meant survival, this deficit would be fatal. You would expend more energy than you could acquire, your body would break down faster than it could repair, and the end would come far more quickly than you might imagine. Stone Age people were not superhuman. They were simply adapted to their environment through a lifetime of conditioning and generations of natural selection. You are adapted to a completely different world, and transplanting you to theirs would be like taking a tropical fish and dropping it in Arctic waters. The environment is fundamentally incompatible with your adaptations, and no amount of willpower or determination can bridge that gap quickly enough to save you. This is not a failing on your part. It is simply the reality of how profoundly specialized we have become for modern life. We have traded the harsh resilience needed for Stone Age survival for adaptations that serve us well in our current world. But it means that the past, for all its romance and fascination, is a place where we simply could not survive. Our bodies, wonderful machines capable of incredible things in our own time, are hopelessly out of place in that ancient world. The final reckoning. So, here we are, at the end of our journey through the Stone Age. We have walked together through a single day in that ancient world, though in truth, you would likely not survive even that long. We have felt the cold that penetrates to your core, met the predators that would see you as prey, struggled with the impossible task of finding food, confronted the diseases that lurk in every wound, endured the unending physical labor, faced the social isolation, and examined the inadequacies of your modern body. Each challenge alone would be daunting. Together, they form an insurmountable barrier between you and survival. It is important to understand that this is not a story of human weakness. Quite the opposite. This is a testament to the incredible strength, resilience, and adaptability of our Stone Age ancestors. They survived in conditions that would kill us within days or weeks. They did so not through some superhuman toughness, but through knowledge accumulated over thousands of generations, through social cooperation that made the group stronger than any individual, and through bodies and minds shaped from birth for their specific environment. Think about what they accomplished. They spread across the entire globe, adapting to every environment from tropical jungles to Arctic tundra. They survived climate changes that made entire regions uninhabitable, migrating thousands of miles to find new homes. They developed sophisticated tools, created art that still moves us today, and built social structures complex enough to transmit knowledge across generations. They were fully human in every way that matters, with the same capacity for love, loss, creativity, and wonder that we possess. But they lived in a world that was fundamentally hostile to human life. They fought against that hostility every single day, and most of them lost. The statistics we discussed earlier bear repeating. Life expectancy of perhaps 25 to 35 years, infant mortality approaching 40%, constant disease, chronic pain, and the ever-present risk of violent death or predation. This was their normal, and they endured it not because they had a choice, but because they had no alternative. When we romanticize the Stone Age, when we imagine it as a simpler, more authentic time, we are engaging in a fantasy that ignores the brutal reality. There was nothing simple about knowing which plants were safe to eat, about tracking wounded game through frozen wilderness, about delivering a child without any medical assistance. There was nothing authentic about starving because the game had migrated away, about watching infections claim your loved ones, about fighting off a cave lion with nothing but a wooden spear. The reason we cannot survive in the Stone Age is not because we are weaker than our ancestors. It is because we are different. We have adapted to a world of abundance and security. Our bodies, our minds, our entire way of being has been shaped by lives lived in climate-controlled comfort with access to medical care, abundant food, and social safety nets. We have traded the harsh resilience of our ancestors for different capabilities. We can learn complex abstract skills, we can specialize in narrow fields, we can collaborate across vast distances with millions of people. These are not lesser adaptations. They are simply different ones, suited to our world rather than theirs. Appreciating this difference should give us profound gratitude for the world we inhabit. When you flip a light switch and illumination floods the room, you are wielding power that would have seemed godlike to Stone Age people. When you adjust your thermostat and comfortable warmth surrounds you, you are defying the cold that killed countless thousands. When you visit a doctor and receive antibiotics that cure an infection in days, you are surviving something that would have been a death sentence for most of human history. When you select food from abundant choices at a store, you are participating in a logistical miracle that makes food available year-round, regardless of season or local conditions. It should also give us profound respect for our ancestors. They endured so that we could be here. Every single one of us is descended from an unbroken line of survivors who managed, through skill and luck, to live long enough to reproduce. They faced challenges we cannot fully comprehend and overcame them just barely enough to give their children a chance. The fact that you exist means that your ancestors, dozens of generations back, survived the Stone Age. They were among the lucky ones, and their success was anything but guaranteed. This understanding should temper our complaints about modern life. Yes, we face stress and challenges. Yes, we deal with anxiety, overwork, and uncertainty. These things are real and valid, but we face them from a position of safety that would have been unimaginable to Stone Age people. We have the luxury of worrying about abstract concerns like career fulfillment and social status because we are not consumed by the immediate demands of survival. This does not invalidate our struggles, but it does provide perspective. It should also inspire awe at how far we have come as a species. In just a few thousand years, an eye blink in evolutionary time, we have transformed from people living in caves and huts to people who can fly through the air, communicate instantly across the world, and extend our lifespans by decades. We have conquered most of the diseases that plagued our ancestors, reduced infant mortality to a tiny fraction of Stone Age rates, and created a world where starvation is a solvable problem of distribution rather than an inevitable feature of existence. This progress came at costs, certainly. We have environmental challenges, social inequalities, and psychological struggles that our ancestors did not face. But trading the problems of modern life for the problems of the Stone Age would be a bargain that no rational person would accept if they truly understood what Stone Age life entailed. The grass is not greener in the past. It is frozen, covered in ice, and surrounded by predators. So, what have we learned from our imaginary journey? We have learned that survival in the Stone Age required a complete package of physical adaptations, accumulated knowledge, social integration, and environmental familiarity that cannot be quickly acquired. We have learned that modern humans, for all our intelligence and technology, are hopelessly specialized for our current environment. We have learned that our ancestors were not primitive brutes, but sophisticated survivors with capabilities we lack. And we have learned to appreciate the incredible privilege of living in a time and place where survival is not a daily struggle against overwhelming odds. The next time you feel cold, remember that you can increase the temperature with a simple adjustment. The next time you feel hungry, remember that food is minutes away rather than days of desperate searching. The next time you get a minor cut, remember that it will heal cleanly rather than potentially killing you. These small moments of comfort are victories over the forces that shaped most of human existence. They are triumphs worth celebrating, and perhaps, with this understanding, we can approach our own lives with a bit more resilience and gratitude. We are the descendants of survivors, inheritors of their strength, even if we express it differently. We face different challenges than they did, but we face them with tools they could never have imagined. We owe it to them, to all those ancestors who struggled so that we might exist, to make the most of the world we have inherited, to build, to create, to improve, and to pass on something better to those who come after us. The Stone Age is over, and we should be profoundly grateful for that fact. It was necessary, it shaped us, and we honor it by remembering it honestly rather than romanticizing it. But it is not a place any of us would survive, and understanding why reveals both how far we have come and how much we should value the present we inhabit. So, tonight when you lie down in your comfortable bed, in your heated home, with your full stomach and your healthy body, take a moment to feel grateful. You are living in the safest, most comfortable period in human history. You have access to wonders that kings and emperors of the past could not have dreamed of. You are not struggling to survive. You have the luxury of living, truly living, in ways our ancestors never could. And if you found this journey through the Stone Age fascinating, if you enjoyed exploring what life was really like in humanity's deep past, I would be grateful if you would take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories to tell, many more periods of history to explore with honesty and depth. Your support helps me continue creating these journeys through time, these glimpses into the lives of our ancestors. Thank you for joining me on this one. May your nights be warm, your food abundant, and your survival effortless as it should be. Until next time, rest well.